All right. First speaker of today, or for today, is going to be IDPH talking about larvicide training. Please make sure also, if you're going to need larvicide, if you need the larvicide training certificate, please make sure you follow the directions they're going to present in the presentation, because IDPH will be issuing those, not IEHA.
Barb, if you are speaking, we cannot hear you. You are on mute.
When you first signed in, did you click audio through telephone?
No, I don't know. How do you do that?
Wait, I can hear you now.
Hello, can you guys hear us now?
Yes, we can.
Great. All right, now we're ready to start. Well, it's a pleasure being here to talk to you all today. This is the 1-hour larvicide training that we give routinely each year for IDPH. Once you complete this training, you'll be able to license through the Department of Agriculture to apply single-use application larvicides for mosquito control, primarily Culex, and it's under the West Nile virus program. If you have any questions, feel free to email us after the meeting, and we have some more stuff we're going to go on to. I'm going to go ahead and start so we can get going. Barbara has part of her presentation she's going to do after. The information we're going to give you is regarding to the West Nile virus outbreak in 2021 in Illinois and nationally. Last year was very unique due to COVID. Many of the groups did not start actually doing collections until much later in the season than usual. And throughout the United States, the situation was very similar in most states. Some states started early and some states maintained their program throughout the year, others did not. Once you complete this training, though, you will be able to apply larvicides in your community as long as you have filled out an NPDS through the Illinois EPA or IEPA, and there's information that you can get from me if you need to get one of those for your community or county. Most of the counties that we have put them into place in the past, and they should still be active for the next several years at least. Last year we had them all updated, and if you have any questions about that, feel free to contact me. I'll be happy to help you with that. Basically, what this requires you to do is you're allowed to use a product that has a caution, as you can read there, on the product. You cannot use anything other than that. It must be a prepackaged product. You cannot use products that are not prepackaged, meaning you can use a single briquette, a single pellet in a rice packet, or granulars that are already prepackaged into a specific that's weighted for a application area, usually less than 10 linear feet or the size of a catch basin. Please always review the label before using this product. It's very important. And once you review the label during the application process, you can really just review it once during the year will really be very helpful. Make sure that you apply the application of larvicides as they're printed on the label. The label is the law. We always do stress that to really be sure. And this is just a general startup. Good news is mosquitoes have not been shown to transmit COVID, and we were not really sure about that last year, but that is actually very accurate. They can transmit other life-threatening diseases, but COVID is not one of them. And the CDC and World Health Organization have done extensive investigation to ensure that that's not one of the transmission methods for COVID. Mosquito facts. The mosquitoes we're looking for in Illinois, and the primary ones you're interested for West Nile virus, are Culex pipiens and Culex restaurans, and we combine them into a big group of Culex SPPs, which means that they're very similar. They have a little bit of a change in their lifestyle, in application, but generally they're similar enough that they both transmit, and they're both very common and very difficult for you to tell apart. So we don't really worry about it too much as long as they're primarily Culex. As you see in the picture below you, the mosquito above is a floodwater mosquito. The mosquito below is a Culex. They are brown in color, relatively smaller than your floodwater mosquitoes. Generally, if you see them together, it's easy to tell. And there are in Illinois in excess of 105 different species of mosquitoes. Only a handful, primarily Culex pipiens and restaurans, Culex tarsalis, and Aedes albopictus are the primary carriers of any kind of diseases in Illinois currently. And they're the ones we really are more interested in. And you're mostly interested in for the application that you're doing to control West Nile virus are the Culex family. Only female mosquitoes blood feed by using their proboscis. It's designed to penetrate skin. It has a heparin that it injects into your skin to prevent your blood from coagulating, and they can take a blood meal. The Culex mosquito primarily is a extremely light biter, a very small mosquito, and generally does not swarm you like you see with floodwater mosquitoes. Also is that the only females blood feed and the only blood feed for egg production. They're already fully developed upon hatching from their pupa form, and they really only need to mate once during their lifetime, where they retain enough sperm to fertilize all their eggs, which generally is between 400 and 1,000 eggs per female mosquito. They will not lay them all at once, but they have the opportunity to lay them over a period of time as they blood feed enough to fertilize those eggs. All mosquitoes, male and female, drink nectar from flowers to maintain their energy. It doesn't have anything to do with their growth. Once they have hatched, they don't get any bigger and they don't get any heavier. They just use the flower nectar for energy for movement. In real world, no matter what else we really say about mosquitoes, they've been present on the earth for 417 million years or more. They have basically stayed taxonomically unchanged during that period. The mosquitoes you see even in amber and in the mosquitoes you see down here that are in fossilized form are actually able to be identified, and both of them are in the Culex. The middle one is definitely in the Culex family, even though it is from the Jurassic period. So we find it very interesting that these mosquitoes have really been unchanged for a very long period of time. And anything you do to control mosquitoes, you're not actually likely to eliminate them, but you do have the good opportunity to control them through the use of larvicides. West Nile virus last year was active in almost all states. There was a few states that showed non-human activity. These were uniquely and probably related to the inability of the health system to even look for West Nile virus last year. If you reported to your physician that you had a headache, fever, and you were not severely ill, but you had a headache and fever, they would not send you in for testing or do anything with you because of the risk that you had COVID. And many of the cases last year were just not really identified. The concerns we have are a few things, though, is states that routinely had large numbers of West Nile virus did not really reflect those numbers. And the ones that did show, which I'm going to flip the next slide to, the ones that did have activity were in areas that we really saw late season primarily, with the exception of places like Florida, which we rarely see human cases in. We had a substantial number of human cases last year, which was very unusual. So we want to talk about that a little later. Florida was very late to the game on doing any kind of COVID sampling or testing, and they continued to identify cases even though for West Nile virus, even though they were not looking for COVID cases early in the season, which gave them a significant number. Usually they are in the very low end number of cases that we identify in Florida, and they are up in our fourth or fifth place, which I'll get to in a minute. We had 557 cases nationally. We usually have about 2,000 to 3,000 in a normal year, and we've had as many as 18,000 to 20,000 in very unusual and highly active years in the past. So we know this number is extremely low. We know that West Nile virus did not go away. We were just unable to detect it because of all the COVID activity that you all were performing last year. We looked at the neuroinvasive disease, and it was still fairly similar. There were still a few cases of it throughout the U.S., but primarily is that we had seen it in areas that where we normally did not see it. And these are the ones where it was most active, but their population levels were relatively low, and the cases were only identified late season. The distribution of cases by state, California had 184 cases, and Texas had 69, being the second highest. Florida was 49. They're generally in a very low number throughout these states. Colorado had 35. Michigan had 32. We had 29 cases last year, and then we had Florida, Nebraska. We had Nebraska and South Dakota, which are relatively large producers in normal years, produced very few cases. This was just primarily due to the COVID outbreak, and that's the best we can do. We want to talk about the important vectors of West Nile, and this is what you're really here for, to kind of identify what you need to know in regards to mosquitoes for transmission of West Nile virus in Illinois. And St. Louis encephalitis, which we have not seen, but does not mean we may not see. Culex pipiens or Culex restaurans are the primary mosquito that transmit. They like to lay their eggs in stagnant water with organic debris in the water, pretty soupy looking water, especially like you find in storm basins and catch basins, abandoned swimming pools, clogged gutters. And this mosquito primarily is not a mosquito that is very aggressive, an aggressive biter. When it does bite you, they are usually more active after dusk and before dawn. The reason they are more active in those time periods, their body weights are so light, if they fly during direct sunlight, they actually will desiccate and have a very difficult time flying. That's why you do not see them flying in direct sunlight or even earlier when it is warmer. They prefer that dusky, moderately humid temperatures that we find in Illinois late in dusk and before dawn. Aedes albopictus is another mosquito that we do see that may transmit lacrosse encephalitis in Illinois. It has not actually been identified yet, but it is a possible carrier because it is a good carrier for similar viruses in Southeast Asia. It does transmit dengue, chikungunya, and Zika in other parts of the world, and that's why we anticipate that it will transmit lacrosse in the United States. It lays its eggs primarily in artificial containers, even sometimes indoors in large buildings like in rain barrels, tires, buckets, and they are active and heavy biters even during the day and are able to aggressively fly even in direct sunlight and will actually be very active and make you very uncomfortable if there's a large number of them. Please note, though, that the Asian tiger mosquito is the name. The Asian tiger mosquito name is relatively deceptive. This mosquito is as small or slightly smaller than the Culex mosquito. It's just a highly aggressive biter, but the main risk is that it does easily transmit many diseases worldwide as a mosquito population. Aedes tricereatus is the treehole mosquito. It is a transmitter of lacrosse and has been identified so. It prefers, and lacrosse has actually been on the decline in Illinois for the last 20 years. They prefer to lay their eggs in natural containers, primarily tree holes, buckets, watering cans, and are active during the day and relatively generally do not fly during the evening. They are very active during the day and primarily under shaded areas in a property and usually near a ditch or a ravine. And tree holes is where they're naturally occurring if you had no other artificial containers available for them. Aedes vexan is our biggest mosquito population in Illinois. It is not currently known to transmit any disease or any known human pathogens in Illinois. There are some other places worldwide where Aedes vexans has been able to transmit, but has not been identified in the United States. They lay their eggs preferably on soil or grass areas near areas that will flood, and as the next rain comes, their eggs are washed into the water where they become activated. If the eggs do not activate, they will rest in the soil for many years and maybe as long as 50. And once that area floods up again, the eggs will float up into the water and actually hatch and become mosquitoes even that late a date. They do fly long distances, not quite as far as solicitans, but they do fly long distances to search for blood meals. These are the ones when you're out in the evening that really are very aggressive and have an opportunity to really bite you and be flying around and buzzing you and getting in a large group to bite you at this one time or another. Aedes sollicitans is another one. It's the salt marsh mosquito. They are probably the most aggressive biter we have in Illinois. They prefer their legs to lay their eggs in salt water or brackish water, primarily oil drilling sites where they pump the water out of the oil drilling sites, mining areas, road salt storage areas, and they're active at twilight and can fly extremely long distances and are very aggressive biters, and usually are in large, and they hatch in large numbers and are very concentrated in periods of time. The mosquito life cycle. Why we need to know this is because of our control measures require them to really, we need to control them in their larval form. Is the very best method to control them. All mosquitoes have a complete metamorphosis, an egg, larva, pupa, and adult. The eggs are laid on the surface of the water for Culex mosquitoes. They lay them directly on eggs in small egg rafts. Egg rafts are about the size of a small sesame seed, and the eggs will sit on the water for a period of time. They will then hatch. They will go into the water as larvae, where that is their only real feeding form, where they ingest material for growth and development. Once they get to the pupa form, they no longer ingest food. They are able to move, and they slowly they do their metamorphosis in that portion, where then as they mature as the pupa, they become an adult. They rest on top of the water for a short period of time, and then they fly off as adults. They do not ever get any larger than when they fly off. So if you find two mosquitoes of different sizes, they are generally two different species. All right. Culex egg rafts can lay their rafts between their raft sizes, usually between 40 and 400 eggs. That is not all the eggs they have. The picture here we have of a Culex, the eggs are generally not that color. They always immediately discolor within a few minutes of being laid on the water, and they are generally very dark and slightly curved. They usually hatch between 3 and 5 days, and they're always associated with pools of water that are highly organic or have sewage in them, because the mosquito larvae ingest large amounts of material to develop their growth very quickly. And that's why we use larvicide in that point. The egg habitats are very best. There's stormwater, catch basins, swimming pools, and just water that is backed up and retains greater than 10 days and is already highly organic. The second stage of the mosquito population are called larvae. Sometimes they're called wigglers. They move in the water. They are very light sensitive. So if you put a shadow onto the water, they will dive and avoid you to get out of the way. They do notice movement out of the water. They try to be secretive so you don't see them. If you come in and you walk toward a puddle that you're looking at that you anticipate have larvae in it, if you don't cast a shadow on it, you will generally see them actively moving in the water. All mosquito larvae are completely aquatic. If you get them out of the water, they will die immediately. They do feed on organic debris and microorganisms in the water for growth. In warm weather, they can develop from anywhere from 5 to 10 days. And this is probably the key life stage of the mosquito control emphasis. This is why they can't fly, they can't escape the area they're in. This is the ideal place to use a larvicide on them to kill them or to disrupt their development so they never develop into pupa. The third stage is called pupa. They are also called tumblers. They dive in the water, and they are basically just waiting to develop in their pupa to develop into an adult, which usually develop into adults in about 3 days. They don't feed, but they do breathe, and they do come to the surface of the water. And that's why when you're doing mosquito control, you will see pupa and adults together. They don't always progress at the same speed, so you will see larvae and pupa in the same water source generally. Once they emerge, they become adults, and at that time, they are completely able to feed and reproduce. A female mosquito always requires a blood meal, but it's not for growth or anything else. It is for the production of eggs. They must have them, and many of them bite birds, mammals, and sometimes reptiles. and all species have a unique preference for what blood meal they take. The Culex mosquito primarily would feed on birds when they're available, and after doing identification of their blood in their abdomens, we identify that about 80% of the time they do blood feed on birds, and that's where they collect the West Nile virus and amplify it in their bodies and then transmit it to mammals or other animals as they bite them also. So the mosquito has to have had, to give you West Nile, the mosquito has to have had a blood meal from an infected bird before it's able to transmit it to you. Mosquito larva control, that's what you're really here for today. It's always the best way to kill mosquitoes is to kill them in their water source. This is whenever reasonably possible. You can reduce their populations by actively controlling them in the water. They're much easier to control than they are when they're adults and flying. The opportunity to kill larvae in the water, if you treat it, is almost at 100%. Once they're in flight and you're trying to use an adulticide on them, which this license does not allow you to do, but if you did have a full Department of Ag license and you were using adulticide, you will probably kill no more than 15 to 20% of the adult population that is in flight every time you apply. And that's why it's so important to get these mosquito larval control into these breeding sites where you know they're breeding, where you see the larva present, and you're allowed by this license to use a single prepackaged material only. You cannot use anything that's not prepackaged. Remember, larvae are the only ones that feed, pupae don't, so you must control them as larvae. So the earlier application into the water source that continues to last during the period of time you're trying to control them is generally the best. We always recommend now that if you're doing larvicide application in your communities, we'd like to see you start at or about June 1st. And you can continue as the material you've been given, whether it's 30, 60, 90, or 180 days, to reapply as necessary during that time period as the label requires. Catch basins really are our biggest producer, and that's why we ask you when you're doing your treatments to really address the catch basins. Catch basins are not attached to generally not attached to any sanitary sewers. They are a stormwater system, and they are not treated, and they discharge into public waterways. So always use materials that are EPA approved and have no more than a caution warning on them. We do not want to disrupt the environment in any way. When you look at a catch basin, the middle picture there of how a catch basin is designed, there is a sump which is below the pipe, because if the pipe was at the very bottom, as you got debris into it, it would fill into the pipe and none of them would actually work. Because there's a sump there, all the organic material settles into that sump below the discharge line, and you see those areas as a good opportunity where you get highly organic concentrated materials and where Culex are able to easily get in and lay eggs in those places, and they will thrive there as long as they are not flushed out during hard seasonal rains. The type of materials that we ask you to use are primarily, there are three big families of them. There are the methoprene or alticid materials, which are insect growth regulators. They will not kill the larvae. If you use an insect growth regulator such as methoprene, you will see the larvae still present in the storm system or in where areas you've treated. It does not kill them. It just slows their development to where they don't develop into adults. The primary use of these are best in containers and in floodwater areas that will last more than 10 days, or catch basins is ideal use for methoprene. Methoprene has been a long-standing product. We have not seen resistance to it yet, but we always recommend that if you're using a material that you periodically rotate your materials to use a different kind of material so that you don't develop a resistance. Methoprene has not shown a resistance yet, but we certainly don't want to get a mosquito that is resistant to it. Bacterius thuringiensis israelis, or BTI, it's got trade names of Vectovac, Summit, mosquito dunks, those things you see at the hardware store, Bactimos. They're a bacterial and they are a gut toxin. It does kill the mosquito when they ingest it, even at very, very small parts per billion numbers in the water source. They can be used in floodwater and in catch basins. If you are using BTI in floodwater or catch basins, always read the label. Their application amounts are substantially higher if you're using them in very organic water, because you have to compete with the organic water for the mosquito to ingest enough material to die from it. Bacteria sphericus, which is a Vectolex product, works very well. It is also a bacterial and is a gut toxin and kills the mosquito upon application. It does work better in septic waters and in catch basins than does BTI. So Bacteria sphericus, or BS, sometimes it's just called, is a highly effective product. They have a product that is listed here where it is a combination of BTI and BS. It's called 4-Star, and it is a product that does a mixture of Bacteria sphericus and Bacteria thuringiensis, which does be highly effective in controlling mosquitoes that you're trying to get active to, depending on the conditions of the water. So we always do recommend those as one of the products you should definitely be looking at. Spinosad or Natular is actually a material that is used in other applications. It primarily has a lot of use in the agricultural department related to rootworms, and is effective against mosquitoes. It is a neurotoxin and does have some, and it's only active when it is wet. Once it dries out, it seems to be relatively low in toxicity, but it is a neurotoxin and the label should be followed very specifically, and it should be rotated over a period of time. Spinosad has been shown in rootworms to develop resistance, and we certainly don't want to develop a mosquito resistant to Natular or Spinosad-based materials. They're almost always used in artificial containers because it does need to be concentrated to work effectively. You're required by the law to review the label. I always say you have to review the label annually. It is very nice that the label is only generally one page. Please review the material information. There is no PPE required to use this, other than we strongly suggest, and the label suggests, that you wash your hands after use. You don't smoke, drink, or eat while applying the material. It has an LD50 that is very, very high, meaning that it is safe. The higher the LD50, the safer it is. Some of the materials in concentrated form are greater than 30,000 milligrams per kilogram of body weight, meaning that when you get to those numbers, the test animals that they tested them on, they could not reach a number to cause death in their population due to just the amount of material they had to ingest. Please review any restrictions that it has on the label. Application rates, whether it says one packet or 2 packets per catch basin. How you apply it. Generally, these are all applied by hand or manually applied. If you drop them and they do not go into the catch basin and they are sitting on top, please sweep them in so that they do go into the water, so we don't find them and they don't have an opportunity to be removed or sent elsewhere that they should not be. First aid is relatively do not ingest. If you store them, they should be stored in relatively cool, dry locations, because the rice packets, if they become humid, will stick together and deteriorate, and they become unusable because they are not a single-use product at that time. There are very few, if any, potential environmental hazards, but please review the label to ensure that you are applying them appropriately. The label is a legal document and must be followed. One of the biggest things we have when we go out and do an investigation related to a pesticide product, we ensure that you have read and followed the label directions when you're applying a material, and that's very important that you do that for legal reasons in the event that you were to have a misapplication. It's very unlikely with this product, but it is possible. This is a label, and this is what they look like. It has to have an active ingredient. It has to have the word caution, which you see on it. It has to have what first aid materials are on there. It is a standard label. The materials that they are identifying on the label are the ones that are in the concentrated form. The material you're using is extremely reduced to this and is even less hazardous than the materials that you're reviewing on the label. I just strongly suggest you always read the label once during the season and have one copy available for if the community or people that you are asking, you can get it to them or give it to them at a time that's more convenient for you. You can keep them with you, but you only need to have them available within a short period of time. That's the active ingredient. There's our caution word. There's our first aid statements. There's the environmental hazards. Then, you know, and then there's the use for directions. All these things should be read and reviewed. And I find generally that they're so clear cut that you can generally do that during one part of the season. The main thing we want to look at now is the application rates, depending on the size of the catch basin. So catch basin's depth below the drain is generally between 0 and 2 feet is the normal ones of catch basins. There are communities in our area where were put in the past, and they have relatively deep catch basins, and those need to have more briquettes applied per application to reach the time period that you want to keep the mosquitoes under control. What we got here? Vectalex is another one. It's a similar material. It comes in a rice packet, which you see over there in the corner, and it once you drop that into the water, the rice packet becomes wet. It immediately dissolves, and the material is applied into the area that you just dropped it into. It's a water-soluble pouch. They are highly effective. I strongly recommend if you use them, you keep them and retain them in a bucket or can before application. If you put them in your pocket, the moisture from you walking around will deteriorate them, and the rice packet will not be there when you go to reach for it. Vectalex is a fairly good product. It's Bacteria sphaericus, and it does work in organic water. To keep out of reach is always a thing. First aid is similar to all the other ones. It has a poison control number. If you have any questions on a material, I always strongly recommend that you call the manufacturer. They have all the critical information and can give you much better information than anyone else. They are the ones responsible for the product and maintaining the label and the legal requirements of that, and can explain to you anything that concerns you have. So always contact the manufacturer if you have any questions regarding the product. There's another label for Natural R. This is spinosad. It has the same application as anything else. It's still same relatively low toxicity. Just be careful with it that you do rotate this product if you use it. And that's really the best I can say about those. To receive, and this is the thing I think is most important today out of everything else, to complete this information, you have to return this information to me, and I will ensure that you get a license from the Department of Agriculture. You need your first and last name. You need the address, city and state and zip code, your phone number, your date of birth, because we don't want any other critical information than that, your employer, and your email address. Once I get that information from you, I will put together a packet and send it to the Department of Agriculture for your licensure. And the one main thing you need to do also is, if you have a question or don't get your licenses, to please email me so I can see what went wrong. I'd be more than happy to help you. The people at the Department of Agriculture will have a harder time finding it. It'd be much easier for me to go back and figure out what happened to your license in the event you don't get it. Please try to get all this information to me as quickly as possible so I can get your licensure done as soon as possible. Once you receive the certificate from the Department of Agriculture, it is good for 1 year. If you have any questions, there is an 800 number on here. You can ask them, but I would give you an opportunity first to do that. There's some other questions always regarding check the label. There's a poison control number we strongly recommend you keep with you at any time you're using any pesticide, so that you have somebody you can contact in the event. They probably won't be really concerned about it, but because of the low LD50s or the high LD50s, but you got to make sure that you have an opportunity to contact them in case someone is concerned. If you have any questions, you can email Samantha Kerr. She is the project manager in Springfield, or you feel free to contact me, and I'm sam.davis@illinois.gov, or Barbara O'Mara. And if you have any questions, if I'm able to take them now, I'd be more than happy to. Otherwise, I'm going to turn it over to Barbara, and she wants to talk to you about in regards to what we did with COVID since last March when it started. So thank you so much. There's my number. There's my name. Have a great day. And if you want to text me or email me, feel free to do that. And good luck and have a great day.
All right. Hi, everybody. So COVID response in this last year for environmental health, it has quite a bit to do with ARBO because it interfered with what all we were doing. And what happened last year on March 17th, St. Patrick's Day, sitting in my office, I got a call from Springfield about 4:30 to send everybody home, to abandon the office. We weren't going to work from the office anymore. And, you know, yay, everybody. They're like, what do we do? I said, I don't know. Go home. We'll figure this out. We stayed home and worked from home the next day. On March 19th, I got a call from Springfield that I had been requested to be reassigned to help manage the state lab. Well, how bad could that be? So I said, sure, because number one, I want to be of assistance, and I figured the lab needed help at that point in time. So I went down there, and it was fairly calm. They had 7 extra staff on there. We're processing 1,000 to 2,000 samples a day, which is above and beyond their normal workload. And that started working 7 days a week for me down at the state lab, processing these extra people, trying to figure out what needed to be done, helping with the data entry. April came. At the end of March, they called and they said, April 1st, we're going to start delivering lunch to the lab so that nobody leaves. And part of that was because there isn't a lot of restaurants or anything close to the state lab. So, all right, we'll order lunch. How bad could that be? The samples began to pick up. Things started to moving a little bit differently. I thought that I needed some backup. So I started calling my staff. Some of my staff were like, yeah, tell us what to do. Tell us where to go. We'll do anything. Get me out of the house. We started to get the staff in. You got to remember, the lab is functioning, and everything that they were doing for newborn screening, for rabies, for anything that they had been doing is still coming in. So they're taking on COVID testing in addition to this. So I got some of my people, and we had to take the lunch orders every day, run to Subway, pick them up, bring them back to the lab, and deliver them. We also had questions about the safety checks. What was going on? Who was coming in and out of the state lab? They had no way to stop people. And I set up the staff. We started doing temperature checks. We started checking everybody as they came in, asking, you know, the symptoms, the typical things. Deliveries. We were getting deliveries every day. And so we had to start doing shipping and receiving at night. We started scrambling for people. Some of the temps that had been there for now 3 weeks, going on to 4, just started walking in and going, yeah, we're done. We didn't sign up for this. And some of the public health employees that had been reassigned said, this isn't what we thought it was going to be. And they started abandoning ship. And as this was going on, the samples are increasing. So about mid-April, we just started hiring what we called public service contracts. These were graduate students, college students, students that were just graduating. I had a listing of close to 400 people. I would be calling them at 3 in the afternoon and asking if they could show up at the state lab at 9 a.m. the next day. I called all of my staff in by the 3rd week of April, all of my FDD staff in. We had data teams. We're short computers. We're getting submission errors. We're getting piles and reams of paperwork without birth dates on them, without names, without the submitter. And so every one of those things had to be tracked down. And there were 5 things that had to be on every submission that we were testing for COVID. We spent a lot of time chasing documents. My lunch team. I finally organized the lunch team. There were like 4 people. I would do the ordering every day. They would run and get it. They would distribute it through the lab because we couldn't congregate in one room. We had screenings going on that was doing in the morning from 5:45 a.m. on. Anybody coming in had to be screened. Then we started a MedSpeed account because we were figuring out quickly that the state lab was not going to be able to handle everything coming in. So I had to call in 2 of my best people and volunteer them to set up MedSpeed without any direction. And they were told to figure out how to do MedSpeed pickups of every long-term care facility in the state of Illinois. And there were some days that pencils were being thrown and people trying to just figure out who to even speak to. But we got that starting, shipping and receiving. We had long-term care facilities just dropping off samples, things that weren't marked, tubes that didn't have barcodes on them, no names. Everyone that walked into the state lab had to be CLIA certified. And so I was helping to handle all the paperwork. I even had to call my plumbers in to do a delivery service because there were times we were running around at 4 o'clock on a Friday night trying to deliver to 25 different places. Here's the samples so that we could, here's the testing material so that we could get the samples back in on Monday. I did have a couple employees who weren't close to the state lab. One, Spanish speaking, who got involved in what was called Red Cap. And Red Cap was our contract tracing. Every Spanish speaking positive in the state of Illinois came through my person, and she handled all of that from her home. We were contacting, so every one of my staff and all my food, drug, and devices staff were all working some 10 hours a day, some 12 hours a day, up to 5 and 6 days a week. We're now running at the end of April, 5,000 to 10,000 samples a day. So we were still maintaining. May hit, we've got everybody working 6, 7 days a week. We're running 2 shifts. They're talking about putting a 3rd shift on downtown. Our numbers are still increasing. The long-term care facilities are still dropping off. It was just a nightmare at times, things not being labeled, things that were leaking, information that was lacking. We had state troopers that were showing up at night, and I would have boxes of stuff that had to be delivered to Carbondale. And one night I said, the Carbondale lab shuts at 9:30, and they got there at 6 o'clock, and the state trooper looked at me, he goes, I'll make it. And I'm like, oh my God, okay, goodbye. So we were running testing supplies to testing sites throughout northeastern Illinois. The rest of the environmental health staff statewide was actually going out and manning the state testing sites. And it was really, everything's going on. I'm handling now 40 to 50 extra personnel at the state lab. And Springfield called me one day and said, Barb, you can't order salads. And I was like, oh, you're kidding me. And they said, no, we didn't budget for salads. And I said, we have dietary restrictions. We've got religious restrictions. I said, what do you want me to do? They said, well, it's 50 cents extra for a salad. I said, great, send me the bill, whatever. You know, that was so out of the context of something that was going to bother me at that point in time. And all this time in May, we're still working on MedSpeed. We're starting to transition long-term care facilities to having their supplies picked up and having their tests picked up by MedSpeed. June comes along, we're still hiring. People would show up at 9 in the morning. I had one guy walk up to me at like 1:30 in the afternoon and he goes, I'm supposed to be doing testing, not data entry. And I said, you've got to give me a couple days. And he goes, no. And he just walked out. And I went, okay, there's another one down. That happened 3 or 4 or 5 times. But by this time, the lab was into a routine. We were handling things as well as could be expected. 40 to 50 extra people coming in every day, which increases the lunch. By this time, environmental health and FDD, we really hated the lunch. We didn't want to deliver lunch anymore. There's lots of overtime. We had samples up to 20,000 a day. We had 2 shifts, people coming in at 5:45 a.m., people staying there until 2 a.m. It was wild. By the time we hit July, thank goodness, somebody in Springfield said, it's getting really expensive to supply lunch. Well, we did it April, May, and June. So we ended lunch delivery on July 1st, and everybody was very excited that we ended that. One day in July, we hit 35,000 samples. 35,000 samples that has to be entered with at least 5 data points for every one of those into our database in order to track it. It took us 4 days to enter 35,000 samples with everybody doing data entry. By the middle of July, end of July, MedSpeed finally gets to take hold, and they start delivering. We told long-term care facilities, you have to send this through MedSpeed, taking these to private labs. And as that started happening, I started looking around and going, we need to start getting my staff out of here. And part of that was going to Sam Davis and saying, you need to go out. You need to do something in Arbo. I know it's July. Start going out 2 days a week so that we can start rolling and figure out what's going on. We didn't know if there was any West Nile going. I was still at that time working 6 days a week. And finally, I went on vacation the last week of July. Everything had pretty much calmed down. In the first week of August, I came back and sat down and told the state lab that I was happy to stay and assist them in whatever way they needed to, but now we've got 52 public service contractual people there who were coming every day. Everybody had figured out their jobs. Everybody was doing it. And I slowly was pulling all my staff out. The only exception was shipping and receiving. They didn't have enough people to cover the weekends. So we stayed doing weekend shifts of shipping and receiving at the state lab until October 1st. And I continued to go down to do all of the timekeeping for all the 50 extra staff, because remember, all through this, we're doing all the newborn screening. We're doing all the rabies testing. We're doing all the water testing and beach testing and swimming. It was everything that they normally do, the lab was still doing. And so Sam and I just wanted to take here about 10 minutes and show you that environmental health, when push came to shove, that's who they called on to really bulk up down there at the state lab. And I have to compliment the state lab. The people that were doing the testing down there, the hours that were being asked of people were amazing. I'm not going to say there weren't meltdowns. I'm not going to say it was simple at times. But for the most part, it was controlled. It only got chaotic there at the end of June, the 1st of July, when we were getting 20 to 30 some thousand samples a day and just couldn't keep up. We've still got contractual people working at the state lab today, and they're finishing up. They're still doing samples. They've gotten it down to a dull roar. And environmental health and the food, drug, and device people that I oversee, I could not be more proud of, because each and every one of them showed up day after day, sometimes discouraged, sometimes perplexed, as when my head of FDD walked in one day and he goes, Barb, we've got a refrigerated semi outside that we're supposed to hold the testing supplies in. I said, good. He goes, no, you don't understand. There's body bags in the semi. And I looked at him and I said, well, then you'd probably better wear gloves to get the body bags out of there. It was that type of thing. It was the pothole right outside of the state lab on a City of Chicago road. And 2 people popped their tire that night leaving. None of mine. But the next day, everybody was ticked off about this pothole. Then a truck refused to bring in the samples because he couldn't get around the pothole. Again, any job that nobody else was handling, we would handle. And I got a hold of the mayor's office, and we got a hold of the governor's office, and we said, we have to get the road fixed. We can't get samples in here. It was just strange things that were out of the ordinary that fell to us and fell to my staff, and my staff stepped up. They did wonderfully. I don't know if they wish they could have stayed home for, those 6 months and worked from home like everyone else. And then starting August 1st, my staff went back out there, because we know that in environmental health, we had all of our swimming pool inspections, all of Arbo. The lead hadn't been being done. Everybody jumped back into working 100% again without so much of a break. And I want to compliment them. And then down at the very bottom, I put Sam.Davis's email back up there so that if you want to email him, he's the one to contact about this. We don't know what West Nile would have looked like last summer, but I think we've got the time this year to actually run a program and actually to follow up a little bit more. And hopefully we'll continue to bring our numbers down, even though they're sticking right around, 3,000 a day still. And don't let down your guard. I think that's the entire point here. That's all I have. Thank you for listening. If anybody's got a question, I'm happy to try to answer. Okay, great. Go, Rachel.
All right. Thank you very much for you guys coming and speaking to us today. Next up, are there any questions? I'll actually stop for that one. All right. We'll go ahead and roll into the next one. The next speaker is Stephanie Straight and Corinne Poblinski with Peoria City County Health Department, discussing conducting virtual and hybrid inspections.
All right. So very quickly, I was going to turn my camera on so you can have a face to go with the name. I'm Stephanie Straight, an environmental health coordinator at the Peoria City County Health Department. I oversee more of the food program in environmental health here. I've been in this position for approximately 3 years. And for the 5 years prior to that, I was an environmental health specialist / sanitarian, whichever name it had at that point, at this same health department. So I've been in environmental health now since 2013. And I would like to turn it over to Corinne to give herself an introduction to you guys.
Hello, everyone. My name is Corinne Poblinski. I'm the Environmental Health Training Specialist for the Peoria City County Health Department. I have been with the Peoria City County Health Department for over 13 years now, in various positions. And Stephanie is going to actually do most of the presentation, and then I am going to walk through what some of our response efforts actually looked like online.
Yes, so in advance, we will say, hopefully the transitions will be fairly smooth. We're going to transition back and forth between this PowerPoint and Corinne giving you some actual demonstrations of REDCap and the capabilities. So we will try to do it as smoothly as possible. If anyone has any questions, feel free to put those in chat. We'll also answer questions at the end. I will forewarn that I can't see questions while I'm doing the presentation part. So if something comes up that is needed beforehand, just turn on your mic and go ahead. All right, so this presentation today is conducting virtual and hybrid inspections, a pandemic year in review. It's a little bit just of an overview of how our past year has been. I think there are probably plenty of you out there that can relate to some or all of it. And just like Barbara just talked about, everybody had to be flexible, and we had to very quickly change our tactics and learn as we go to basically survive it. Just a second. Okay, so just a little history for those of you that aren't in this region of Peoria. These are the COVID regions as of most recently. So we are in Region 2, which has Peoria, Bloomington, Tazewell, Woodford, those areas right there for Restore Illinois. we do a little bit of everything. So we have food protection, water, on-site wastewater, vector, lead, and non-community public water supply. Our department is made up of a director, 3 program coordinators. So we have one that oversees lead, the Lead Safe program, one who oversees the food program, which is me, and then another program coordinator that does on-site wastewater, water, non-community public water supply, and vector. We have an environmental health training specialist. That was a newer position that was created last year and was perfect timing, actually, because we had a lot of training to do in a very short period of time to learn quite a few new things as things changed. We have 2 lead risk assessors and 10 environmental health specialists / practitioners. In Peoria County, there are approximately 1,100 food service establishments. Last year, which, it was a little bit off because of COVID. I think some things were probably put off in terms of repairs or replacements, but we had about 89 on-site wastewater repairs or replacements and 51 water wells, including repairs, replacement, ceilings, and geothermals. So the first wave of COVID mitigations, everyone in environmental health or in working with local health departments, state, etc., remembers this, which was last March. For Illinois, dining at all restaurants was going to close for at least 2 weeks. So a little bit of a timeline for us. March 9th, we had that disaster proclamation related to COVID-19 that was released. On the 15th, the Illinois restaurants were ordered to close indoor dining at the end of day 316, which was right before St. Patrick's Day, so they were not very happy about it. March 30th, the indoor dining ban was extended through April 30th at least, and then again through May 28th. That is when we started looking at a way that we could still connect to our food establishments. We made a self-inspection form and mailed that out to all of our food service establishments. We also included some guidance, or at least the guidance we had so far, which was, differences between cleaning and disinfecting, because we were seeing a lot of places that thought that because of COVID, they should now be using food contact surfaces to be disinfected. So we were concerned about toxic amounts of either sanitizer or disinfectant being used on a lot of these food contact surfaces. So we sent some information on that, and then information on how to safely switch and transition to curbside dining, to go pick up those sorts of things. May 29th, Illinois moved into phase 3 of the Restore Illinois plan. The restaurants and bars reopened for outdoor dining, and we began virtual inspections. And I'll go over these inspection types on a future slide, but the virtual inspections overall were inspections that we did through an electronic means, so we weren't physically on site in the restaurant. June 26th, Illinois moved into phase 4 of the Restore Illinois plan, which we are currently back in now. Restaurants and bars reopened for indoor dining with additional minimum guidelines, and we began hybrid inspections, which were a combination of the virtual component of some things that were done in advance so that we could then spend less time on site when we go to the establishment and have less contact time. August 26th, phase 4 guidelines for restaurant and bars were updated to require face coverings at all times while interacting with establishment staff. Oops, sorry. So the 3 new inspection types that we would be talking about today were the self-inspection. That's one just conducted by a representative of that food establishment using an inspection form, which started off as a paper form, and then we switched over to electronic. The virtual inspection was conducted between us and the food establishment using video call, smartphone, tablet, whatever electronic device they had that was capable of a video call or conference. And then we moved into hybrid inspections where it was a combination. There was an offsite component that may have been completed over the phone, for instance, asking them to send a copy of their vomit and diarrhea procedures, or their food handler training or their certified food protection manager training to us in advance so that we could review those. And then the other part of the inspection was actually done on site and scheduled with a person in charge. So at the beginning, March and April of 2020, there were a lot of learning curves. We created that paper self-inspection. We mailed it to all those establishments. We got 229 back. So we were very excited when we started getting those back and people were doing them, until we took a closer look at them and discovered that most of the establishments, actually probably close to 100%, marked every single violation as in compliance. So they did not mark any violations out of compliance. They didn't really mark any corrective actions taken. We discovered very quickly that there was the training component that was missing. They didn't really understand what it was they were looking for or how they were supposed to mark them. So we thought, there's some value in this connection we're having with these establishments, but how do we increase the value of this form? Because as is, it wasn't really valuable. It was more like busy work at that point. So Corrine Poplinski, the other person presenting with me, she took that self-inspection and created an electronic version of it in REDCap, which she'll show you. And REDCap is something we all have access to. And the best part about it is that it is free for us to use. So although SurveyMonkey might be a little bit, it seems like it's a little more user-friendly, it's something we're all a little more used to. REDCap is something that's available to all of us as locals, state workers, etc. And it's free. So we use the email addresses that were provided on those paper inspection forms to transition to the electronic version in April 2020. We got 155 of the electronic ones back between May 1st and June 1st. So even though it wasn't as many as when we were getting those paper ones where they were just kind of checking off everything as being in compliance, they were much more accurate, much more realistic of actual conditions. There is a lot more opportunity when you're using REDCap to add in educational components that they can click on and utilize. And some of the different questions had places for them to enter in, temperatures, sanitizer concentrations. It could give them more of an explanation of what they were actually looking for. So having the electronic version actually helped us train the establishment staff on how to complete these inspections. So this is just one example of something we put on our Facebook. We started blasting on our Facebook, have you done a self-inspection yet? We also changed our email signature to basically say, have you done a self-inspection recently? And started advertising it as something that would help them get used to the virtual inspections or hybrid inspections. And I will now turn this over to Corrine to show you a little bit of this actual form.
So this is our actual self-inspection form. This is available online. Like Stephanie said, this was created using REDCap. I personally love REDCap. If you don't know how to use it, I would recommend going into it and playing with it. I use it for a lot of different data collection as well. So this is what the form looks like. When people clicked on our link, this is what they would be taken to. They would fill out their establishment information, and they would also select their category or risk level. And this would actually open questions up specific to that category. So if you said that you were a high risk or a category 1, we would then ask you questions about highly susceptible populations, special processing, and cooling and reheating, that sort of thing. If you clicked on medium, you would get questions specific to medium risk categories, and low, you would get questions specific to low risk categories. If a restaurant had no clue what category they were, which we often found was the case, they could click unsure and it would give them the same questions as a high risk category. We also asked them questions about their COVID-19 response, such as if they're currently in operation or not. If they were in operation and they clicked yes, they would get several statements where they understand that every 2 weeks they were expected to complete a self-inspection if they remained open. We also asked them questions about if they're assessing their employee health, social distancing, and cleaning and sanitizing routinely. Then we move on to the different categories of questions that we would ask them about personnel. You know, do you have certified food managers, food handlers? Do you have allergen training? We had approved sources of food. Are you receiving it in sound condition? That sort of thing. And all these questions, they would answer yes or no. It's very simple, yes, no, or NA. We don't do that at our establishment. Some of the questions also provided explanations about, you know, what was best practice or maybe what they looked for. So for instance, you know, are you receiving foods at the proper temperature? And it's best practice to inspect all of these shipments before allowing them into your establishment. They also, if they clicked no on the questions, they would be asked to describe the violation and what they did to correct it. And oftentimes they were also provided with educational information. For instance, this one, if they say that no, their canned goods are in not good condition, we attached our HACCP bulletin that they could click on and download, and they could then learn how to evaluate their canned goods when they receive them. Again, we asked all sorts of categories of questions about their health and hygiene, temperatures, and that sort of thing. We also had questions that would take them through whether things were imminent health hazards. So for instance, you know, do you have both hot and cold running water? And they said no, and it would pop up saying, okay, this is an imminent health hazard and you have to close immediately until it's corrected, and please contact us for further information. And then they would just submit this to us and we would get an email from RedCap saying that somebody had submitted it. So I will send it back to Stephanie and she will talk about our virtual inspection.
All right. So just a little bit more on those self-inspection forms, kind of what we determined from it. And this is particularly about the electronic form because we very quickly realized that our paper inspection form, without the establishment training component, it's essentially useless because they don't really know what they're looking for. But once we started doing it electronically, we were getting back better inspections and they were showing an understanding of what we were asking or what we were looking for. So some of the pros, it reminded the establishments to consider food safety. So to still think about that even while they're in the midst of COVID-19 response. It indicated a willingness or unwillingness to comply with the different guidance provided by the health authority. It provided the lowest risk to PCCHD staff or the community since there wasn't actual contact involved. It gave us a lot of updated contact information, which we quickly realized was something that we need to focus on because in the future, if we have situations like this, the communication part is what we needed the most and we're missing. We really needed that updated contact information so that we can get the right information to the right people. Also forced us to be more familiar with RedCap. So I know I learned a lot from Corinne on it that, I had been hesitant to do previously. She showed me how easy it was once you really get used to it. You can do so much with it. Some of the cons, I already talked about that a lot of establishments submitted perfect inspections when they were on the paper form. We know that it's not a completely accurate or objective assessment of current food safety standards. They're kind of going to answer sometimes what they want. And then when we were still doing the paper inspections, it was kind of that staff time spent entering or reviewing inspections that were copy and pasted and marked all in compliance. So the next thing we moved into was the virtual inspection. So we quickly realized we wanted to be able to have more of a connection with them. We wanted to get them used to what we would be doing in the future, which would be a partially on-site component with some virtual. And so we started setting those up where we would call, ask them what capabilities they have for being able to do these inspections, and then setting them up to where we do it completely either on our tablets or on our cell phones. And Corinne will show you a little bit of the virtual inspection form and how it's different.
All right, so this is our virtual inspection form, and I know there are a couple comments in the chat about people wanting the links to these, and Carrie is sharing those links with you. There is actually a way that I can download the data and the forms and send them to you as well if you are a REDCap, if you are signed up with REDCap. So if you are interested in doing this yourself, I can send you basically the bones of what we did, and you can kind of customize it for yourself. So this is our virtual inspection form. This one is a little bit different than the self-inspection form because it kind of goes back and forth between the sanitarian and the restaurant. So the first part of it is the sanitarian actually fills this out. They will get a return code. They fill out the information of the establishment that they are setting this inspection up with, who they're talking to, when the inspection is scheduled, what platform it'll be on, whether it's Zoom, Teams, FaceTime. We used all sorts of different platforms, whatever the establishment was most comfortable with. They would also put their name and email here. They would list any violations, major violations that were unresolved or things from their last inspection on here. They would select the risk category, and then the sanitarian would actually send an email to the establishment. So REDCap actually does this automatically. When you would click this button, REDCap would automatically send the email to the establishment for them to complete their portion of the survey. The establishment would come in to their survey using their return code and the link provided to them, and they would fill out their part of the inspection. So they would confirm their email and their phone number and their name. They would tell us whether they're classified as a restaurant, do you have shellfish, do you serve raw or undercooked foods, that sort of thing, to use time only as a control. And there are several pages of questions that we'd ask them about their COVID-19 response. Do you have personnel there? And we would actually ask for them to send us some of their information as well ahead of time, so they could send us their certificates. You would upload a file, so you would upload your food handler or your certified food manager certificates right into REDCap. And you would send that directly to your sanitarian. You could also upload your vomit and diarrhea cleanup procedures directly into your form. You would say how you corrected violations from your last inspections. And if you had any questions about anything, you could also add that into this form. We did require that during the virtual inspection that they take their own temperatures and show proper sanitizer concentration. So we were finding that they didn't have the equipment to do that when we were doing the virtual inspection. So we went back in and added a question after the fact saying, do you have a metal stump thermometer? Do you have sanitizer test strips? Because you're going to be expected to do these things on your own. When the establishment was done with their portion, they would hit the save and return later button, and this would automatically generate an email to their sanitarian letting them know that their establishment had completed their portion of the inspection and it was ready for review. Then during the inspection, the sanitarian would go on the virtual platform and they could actually do their inspection right on this form as well. So these are we didn't look at every single thing we'd look at during a normal routine inspection. We really only looked at the major things. And so the sanitarian could go through, they would answer yes, no, or NA. And then if it was a violation and they didn't meet one of the criteria. There'd be a spot for notes for the sanitarian to write notes. And it also, it includes which violation number that it's written under and whether it's a priority foundation or a core violation. Because after the inspection was completed, the sanitarians would then take this information and upload it into our database system as a real inspection. So that's a little bit of the difference between the self-inspection form and the virtual inspection form. So I am going to turn it back over to Stephanie.
All right. So with the virtual inspections, a little bit of the pros and cons, and we kind of surveyed staff to find out what these were, or people that are, actually doing these inspections. So again, like the other one, it also reminds establishments to consider food safety still. It still provides a low risk to our staff and their staff because there's no contact. It's more interactive than the self-inspection. So you get to most of the time actually see a face, they get to see you. It forces the PIC to demonstrate knowledge through use of the equipment that they have. Reiterates the importance of records review since they have to think about it in advance. The cons, technology and reception issues. So these have gotten a lot better over the year, but definitely in the beginning, it was a lot of trial and error. We have a lot of establishments that are in old buildings in Peoria, and we quickly discovered that there are some places where there is no reception. So we had to get very creative with that on some of them, try a different type of call. Sometimes it had to be a telephone call. Sometimes we just had to have them use something else. Just get a little creative with what we can do. And there were some places where there was just no reception whatsoever. It was going to have to be more of a self-inspection type. The initial setup and troubleshooting took a little bit of time in the beginning. Once people were used to it, it was a lot easier, but in the very beginning, it could be a little clumsy. The inability to truly conduct a risk-based inspection, we're seeing what they're allowing us to see. So it is better than the self-inspection, but it's not going to entirely replace us being on site. And sometimes it's hard to follow the flow of food when it's being driven by the PIC versus us. Their idea of the flow of food is going to be different than what ours is. So there is a lot of leading of, can you show me, when you get this in, where do you store it? Show me the temperature there. Then what do you do with this food next? Where do you take it next? There's a lot of leading involved in that, but a lot of opportunity for education as well. So we then moved into, I believe from our timeline, I think it was June or July, we started doing the hybrid inspection form. As we moved into phase 4, we thought it would be safe for us to be able to go on site. We did have all establishments fill out a pre-screening no less than 24 hours before we were going into their establishment that asked them, is anyone here had symptoms of COVID? Are you willing and able to wear a mask during this time? We told them we wanted to come at a time when we thought there might be less people, so there's less contact. We asked them to make sure they kept, 6 feet distance from us as much as possible. And we asked them still to continue to be the ones taking some of the temperatures and things like that, so that we're not touching their equipment, they're not touching our equipment, really trying to be more observers and educators. So I will turn this over to Corinne. I think there's only a few differences with this one, but just to show you what this hybrid inspection or pre-inspection form looks like when we knew there was going to be an on-site component.
All right, this is our hybrid inspection form. It's very similar to the virtual inspection form, only there's a little bit less to it that the restaurant would actually fill out themselves. And there's quite a bit more behind the scenes stuff going on with this form. So again, the sanitarian would fill out the information of the restaurant that they had set up an appointment with to inspect. These were scheduled inspections, so they would be at a very specific date and time. They again would list any major violations from the last inspection, and REDCap would automatically send the invitation to the establishment to complete their portion of the form. This is the same as our virtual inspection form. The establishment would receive it. They would enter their return code to finish filling out their form. It asks the same sort of questions that the virtual inspection asks. And again, these are also very dependent on whether you click whether you're a high, medium, or low risk. There are more questions associated with the high risk versus the other risks. We also asked the restaurant about their COVID-19 response, and they did have to complete this at least 48 hours before their inspection so that we knew that it was safe to go into their restaurant. We also asked them to upload their certified food manager information, food handler information, allergen training, and vomit and diarrhea cleanup procedures ahead of time, so that we could review that and spend less time in their establishment. And when they were completed with that, they would submit that portion of the form, and then they would be taken directly to a COVID-19 health screening form. So this, I'm sure you all use a very similar form to this for COVID-19 health screening, but they would answer these questions, whether they or any employees had any symptoms of COVID, whether anyone had been confirmed or suspected to have it, you know, what kind of travel did they do. And we also asked them that the social distancing guidelines and masks would apply during these inspections. So they had to agree to adhere to the guidelines, or they could choose to not agree to adhere to the guidelines, and they would submit that to us. On the back end of it in REDCap, this particular form was set up with quite a lot of alerts and notifications. So if you're familiar with REDCap, this should look familiar. If you've never seen REDCap before, this is what it looks like when you create the forms that I just showed you. Every sanitarian had their own inspection report, so they could go in and look at any of the information that the restaurant had submitted to them using their own report. They would also get emails alerting them to the fact that the restaurant had completed their portion of the inspection. This particular REDCap form also had quite a lot of alerts associated with it because there was that health screening. So if they had answered that, yes, you know, somebody had tested positive, or yes, somebody had symptoms, this would send a separate email to the sanitarian letting them know that that inspection needed to be rescheduled because this restaurant was having issues. Also, if the person did not agree to the social distancing and mask requirements, that very last question that was asked, a second alert would be sent to them as well, letting them know that they could not go into that establishment for that inspection because the establishment owners were not agreeing to those guidelines. All right, I will send it back to Stephanie.
All right. So the hybrid inspections, some of the same pros as the other ones. And as a pro and a con, we have that there is a higher risk to our staff and the community than the self-inspection or virtual, but a lower risk than a full routine inspection. So the pro part of that is that it is a little bit lower risk than a full routine inspection because we are really focusing on the highest risk violations. And then we're trying to get all that paperwork stuff out of the way in the beginning or before we even come on site. So we don't have to handle those, certificates and things like that. But then it does still present some risk to staff. It does allow us to conduct a bit of a more risk-based inspection. And we did try to focus on the risks versus facility maintenance. We had to kind of put on blinders a little bit for that and really try to focus on the things, the main points we wanted to see during that inspection. The cons, less time spent on site, as well as focusing the inspection means not all areas of the Illinois Food Code might be assessed. We're not looking at as much at floors, walls, and ceilings. It could be considered a con or a pro that the establishment is scheduled or given advance notice. It can skew the inspection a little bit. We were surprised that there were still as many violations as there were when the establishment knew we were coming, but we still did see violations, some of them major, even imminent health hazards. We just had to suspend a license a couple days ago at a scheduled inspection where they scheduled it, had us come in, didn't seem concerned at all that there was wastewater bubbling out of the drains. So that was an interesting one. Those are the 3 inspections. And then moving from that first wave of COVID-19 mitigations to the second wave, when indoor dining was once again closing across central Illinois. The date on that, November 1st, 2020, it was the top story on most of the news programs around here, at least. I'm sure most everywhere as well, since it's going into the holiday season when a lot of people go out to eat. For our timeline, November 4th, our region 2, moved into tier 3 mitigations under phase 4. All of our restaurant and bars were ordered to close indoor dining. We returned to those self-inspections and virtual inspections only. We stopped having our staff go into those restaurants. January 15th, region 2 moved into tier 2 mitigations under phase 4. But that included all restaurants and bars still suspending indoor dining. However, it was only 10 days later that Region 2 moved into phase 4 altogether, which we're currently in, where restaurants and bars are opened for indoor dining, and we've started resuming our hybrid inspections, which is our preference and what we've been doing the most. February 3rd, all regions in Illinois began operating under phase 4 of Restore Illinois, and in the present, we have seen COVID-19 cases surging, especially in Region 2. And we like that we have the ability to resume self-inspections or virtual inspections if necessary. We're hoping that additional mitigations don't come out, but as we all know, things change constantly. So this is just some of the things we saw during the second wave. So first wave of COVID mitigations, I feel like we had a lot of compliance. We didn't have very many places that were going against the orders, at least that we were hearing about. The second wave in November, when indoor dining was closed, it was kind of an uproar, and we definitely saw a lot more and a lot more articles like this, where restaurants were blatantly reopening their dining rooms. We had others, like on the right-hand side there, that just closed their doors altogether. They weren't able to stay open even as a curbside restaurant or takeout or outdoor dining in November. So they just chose to close temporarily altogether. Because of the vast number of complaints we were getting, we had something called restorehoi.com that was made by the city/county, where people could go and submit any concerns or questions. And essentially it was places that were not COVID compliant. We had people submit all of those concerns through that channel so that we could track them and find the appropriate agency to respond, because not all of them were restaurants. We were getting them about every type of place imaginable. We also put that on our Facebook and our social media because we were getting so many calls daily that we really couldn't keep up with it. We received over 300 complaints, and there was a countywide enforcement, which was first complaint was a phone call and a letter that was mailed to whatever establishment it was. telling them that we had had a complaint and that, what the current mitigation requirements were. The second complaint, we hand delivered a letter. The third complaint, we did a site visit and referred to the state's attorney's office for further enforcement. Overall, 244 letters were mailed or delivered. 9 food service establishments were issued notices to disperse and referred to the state's attorney's office. And 2 of those 9 food service establishments complied. So getting compliance this second round, I feel like most places can probably relate that it was very difficult. We realized a lot of the enforcement wasn't completely working and was kind of getting caught up in red tape. So we tried to come up with other methods that we could try to gain compliance with our community. This is when we came up with the COVID-19 Safety Excellence Awards. It was basically a way to reward and highlight establishments that were adhering to COVID-19 guidelines or going above and beyond. Our first step was a social media push. So we asked the community to nominate. Restaurants could technically nominate themselves. Anyone could nominate. With this very brief survey, again on REDCap, we're now using it for all sorts of things. All they had to say was what the establishment was. And then we put in some different qualifiers of what were you able to observe during your visit that was a COVID safety protocol. And this was to try to kind of get out the places that would be nominated as a sarcastic thing. We still got some of those where, it's places that were openly defying that were nominated for it. And then why are you nominating this food service establishment for the COVID-19 Safety Excellence Awards? So we had a really great response to it. We put it all over our social media. We got 286 nominations from the public, included multiple for the same establishment. So some establishments got 30 or 40 nominations just for them. All of those that were nominated by the public were sent an application to fill out in order for us to determine their eligibility for the award. The requirements for the application were just completing it. It was 1 page, doing 3 additional activities, and these were done in good faith for the most part. So following us on social media, giving us new contact information, submitting your employee health agreements. There was additional COVID-19 training that was free on ServSafe. They could have done that if they wanted. And then a very short essay of what precautions or steps has your establishment taken during the pandemic to ensure employees and customers are COVID-19 safe. And we asked them to be as specific as possible. So of all of those that we sent out, 31 applications were received. 30 of them were eligible. For the mandatory criteria that our staff verified with each application was that they operated with a valid food safety license. Their license hadn't been suspended or revoked. They were nominated. They did not have any valid or confirmed COVID-19 complaints. That part is a little hard to judge, but for the most part, if we had a COVID-19 complaint, it was if we were able to confirm that it was actually valid. We did get some for places that weren't entirely valid, while other ones we were able to confirm were valid. And then the establishment had completed at least one either routine or self-inspection or virtual inspection or hybrid inspection in 2020. Those 3 additional activities were completed, and they had a satisfactory response to the short essay. It went very well. We had a lot of interest in it. We were pretty happy. The news did some videos on it. We had it in a lot of the local news programs, even as far as Bloomington, Illinois, were showing about it. And we tried to make it a fun ceremony. It was a virtual ceremony, but we invited all of them to watch, and we got them nice certificates that were mailed out that they could post. We got a really great response, and a lot of them posted it on their own social media and talked about what it meant to them to get it. So in short, some of the key takeaways from this past year in the pandemic. a lot of learning curves, a lot of learning in general, but the importance of assessing knowledge by having the food service establishment staff demonstrate their own equipment. I think sometimes when we do inspections, there's such a limited time period that you're in there where you have access to the full establishment staff or someone who, you know, can walk around with you, that during this year having to, you know, make them use their equipment was really helpful because we were able to do a lot of education on that. And I think it gives them more of a buy-in where they feel like they're a part of that inspection. The pandemic forced us to focus more on personal hygiene, you know, even more than before. You know, following different routes in addition to fecal oral, really looking at, you know, respiratory routes of transmission, realizing how important technology is. And we really want to continue to develop those technology skills. Having the new inspection types, definitely saw with that, the establishments really like those, especially for follow-ups and rechecks, because there's that potential that they're not getting charged a recheck fee because we don't have to go on site. So if it's something that we can actually check through a virtual inspection, we already know how to connect to them through Zoom and they can show us that they've made the corrections, then, you know, we've found a lot of value in that. Found the value in doing some positive enforcement things. So when we realized that some of the enforcement with establishments staying open or reopening for indoor dining, that a lot of our tactics weren't necessarily working, kind of switching over to what can we do to then highlight instead all the places that are following protocols, because that's a lot of the feedback we got were, well, all we hear about are the places that are staying open. They're getting all this attention. They're getting all this you know, promotion, and no one's talking about us. So really trying to turn that around. Learning from failure, trying something else, finding value in scheduling some inspections. So that's something we may want to continue in the future, you know, maybe in between other routine inspections, having one where it's scheduled with the person in charge where we have their full attention and it's during a time when they're not busy, they're not stressed, when they can really walk around with us and we can do more learning and teaching rather than it feeling like an enforcement type situation. Definitely created some new habits. There were a lot of places that are getting much better at organizing their records because they're so used to now needing to provide those in advance or us saying, have all of these ready when we get there. Places are definitely cleaning a lot more and sanitizing a lot more. And really just knowing that there are multiple channels of communication that we need to use and how important having up-to-date contact information is. So those are some of the key takeaways we had from the year in the pandemic. I don't know if anyone else has stuff that, you know, over the past year, what you guys have as key takeaways or things that you've kind of learned that you want to continue or new habits that were created. We would be very interested to hear.
We will also take any questions anyone has. You can type it in the chat or you can unmute yourself and ask us as well. Stephanie, there is one question. Does IDPH recognize virtual inspections and do they count? I will let you take that one.
Currently, I do not believe they are recognized and I don't believe they count. We still feel like there's value in them, even if they aren't counting. I kind of hope some of it can be potentially looked at in the future, maybe the hybrid inspection part as an option that may count, but as far as I know, they do not count as a routine inspection. I will say that for the places that have immunocompromised clientele, so our schools and our long-term care units, they've actually requested these, so they want us to continue them. They aren't having outsiders come in, so they don't want us physically there, but they have wanted to continue doing these virtual inspections because it helps their staff and helps them feel like they're, you know, kind of keeping up with food safety and that they are still aware of what the latest practices are.
Stephanie, we have another question. Did you say for the follow-up / rechecks virtually that you didn't have to charge them? Can you please expand upon that? Does PCCHD charge for follow-up inspections?
PCCHD does charge for follow-up inspections if we have to physically go on site. So if we have to return to see a violation be corrected, we do have a fee for that. We have a first follow-up fee, a second follow-up fee. So if we go for our first follow-up, they know the date is scheduled, the time is scheduled. They know that there will be a fee. If we go on that day and time and it's still not corrected, then it goes to a second follow-up with a different fee, and then a third follow-up with a different fee. And surprisingly, there are quite a few places that it will get to the third follow-up where they just haven't corrected it and they don't tell us that that it's not corrected so that we don't come in. But with these virtual follow-ups, we have had a lot of places take advantage of that and want to do it virtually so that there is no fee charge because we're not going to the establishment. So our staff isn't, it saves our staff a lot of time too.
All right, and we have another one. Do you have any recommendations for dealing with events that are happening with food?
Do you mean temporary events?
She says yes.
Temporary food events, that's been another interesting one to tackle in the past year. We did come up with specific guidelines before we went to phase 4. So during phase 3, I think when we were in phase 3, we had different guidelines for temp events, limited numbers, making a lot of it grab and go. And now for temporary events in phase 4, we're just basically trying as much as we can to give them advice on how to keep themselves safe and limit their liability. But we're having a lot of things proposed that aren't capable of being done safely under phase 4. So I would say the majority of what we get is telling places right now we're under phase 4 and we have no idea what it will be a month from now. So we can tell you what you could do under phase 4 or what you could do under the new bridge. But if we're not at those places, we don't know exactly what it's going to be at that point. So honestly, I would say a lot of it right now is saying, we don't know where we'll be at that point, but this is what you would do, what you could do if we were doing it right now.
And that looks like all the questions we have. If you do have any other questions or you want to talk to us about what we did, our contact information is up on the presentation, and feel free to email us or call us, and we can answer any other questions you have.
Thank you very much, Stephanie and Corinne. We're going to go ahead and take a little break. We're going to start back up at 3 o'clock. Corinne is actually going to come back and give another presentation to us. All right, membership. It is 3 o'clock. I do want to make one announcement as well. I did discuss with Michael Nordis, who is with the FDA. He's going to be speaking on Thursday. His first talk was actually going to be on the risk factor findings, but the FDA has not released that information yet. So instead, he's actually going to talk about how to create your own risk factor study, which will actually roll really well right into the database demonstration, which the FDA database is what you'd want to use for the risk factor findings. So I just wanted to make sure everyone was aware that there was a slight change, but Michael is going to be with us for 2 hours on Thursday regardless. I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Corinne Poblinski and her presentation. Thank you.
Hello again, everybody. One thing from our last presentation that we forgot to mention is that our environmental health staff was also involved in a lot of COVID-19 response efforts, in addition to all the different inspection types that we came up with last year. So very early on, we were all pulled into contact tracing. And now most of our staff is also working vaccine clinics at least once or twice a week. So I know on my time tracking, about 43% of my time is spent with COVID-19 response, and I'm sure all of our coworkers are the exact same way. So we definitely did a lot in this past year. So the second presentation that I will be doing for you today is building a solid food safety foundation for home kitchens. And this was a pilot training program for Illinois cottage food producers. So in addition to being the environmental health training specialist for the Peoria City County Health Department, I am also a graduate student at the Michigan State University online food safety program. And I will hopefully be graduating after the summer semester. So some of the project background, this project was part of my degree program requirements. There are different applied project categories that we can choose from, and I chose to do a training curriculum for my project. I actually had an original project idea that focused on long-term active managerial control at what we would call borderline restaurants. So those who are not quite to failing inspections and having some sort of additional enforcement taken against them, but ones that aren't doing super great. But because of COVID-19, I had to pivot and kind of start over because my original project had a lot to do with me going into some of these kitchens and working very closely with them and doing in-person trainings with them. And so with COVID-19 and the social distancing restrictions, I scrapped that idea. So in early January, I had to come up with something new. And I really thought, okay, what would be very useful for the agency? One of the big problems that we have in Peoria County is we have a very high number of unlicensed food establishments. So these are people who are selling online. You find them on Facebook. I was actually Googling a place to eat lunch last week, and Google told me about 4 establishments which were unlicensed to get great food at. So this is a problem. We've seen it increase with COVID-19, with a lot of our restaurants laying their employees off. A lot of them have started making their own businesses in their homes. So this is becoming more of a problem. Normally in a typical year, we would see about 12% to 17% of all of our complaints that come in about unlicensed food. And this year in January, I believe 66% of our complaints were for unlicensed food. And as of March, the last time I looked, it was about 26% of all of our complaints were for unlicensed food establishments. Around the same time, Justin was like, hey, there are these new cottage food laws going into effect, and this could create a pathway for some of these unlicensed food vendors to become legitimate. So that was the background for the putting together a very specific training for cottage food vendors. If you're not that familiar with cottage food, this is a brief introduction to it. The first cottage food law was passed in Illinois in 2012, and it was updated in 2018. The law allows cottage food producers to make foods in their homes and sell them at farmers markets. They can prepare all types of foods, including TCS foods, unless the food item or ingredient is specifically prohibited by the law. And there is a list of these food items that are prohibited directly in the law. One requirement is that producers have to have a certified food protection manager certificate, but the law does not include any specific food safety measures that the producers have to adhere to in their home kitchens. It also exempts producers from inspection and regulation by the health department. Right now, there are proposed amendments to the law, which will expand, among other things, where the food items can be sold. So there's more access for them to sell foods online, out of their homes, or craft fairs, and other sort of events. And if this legislation is passed, these changes will help create pathways for many of the people who are operating illegally or who are unlicensed or unregistered, and it creates a pathway for them to come into compliance and run a legal business. However, cottage food is really a delicate balance. There is quite a lot of benefits to cottage food. It creates opportunities, especially for women who are living in rural areas where they may not have a lot of other job opportunities. It also allows farmers to increase revenues through value-added products, and it allows for people to have financial freedom and control over their business activities. However, there are risks associated with cottage food. There is the potential for foodborne illness. 46% of all foodborne illness outbreaks are due to produce, which is the one ingredient that's often used in cottage food products. Between 2009 and 2018, there were over 1,000 outbreaks, over 20,000 illnesses, and 88 deaths associated with specifically home-prepared foods. Out of those outbreaks, 145 of them and 10 of those deaths were associated specifically with botulism from improperly home-canned foods, which is a food item that is allowed under cottage food. So in order to create this training, I did some information gathering. So I wanted to know specifically what kind of issues were out there among cottage food vendors, and what they had questions on, what they had concerns about. So I met with several cottage food stakeholders. I asked our employees what kind of issues they see. I talked to people from the Illinois Stewardship Alliance, the University of Illinois Extension, the Land Connection, and there's also an Illinois Cottage Food Entrepreneurs Facebook group. I looked at past posts, discussions, and questions from that Facebook group to get more information as well. And I introduced myself to the group, and I asked them, if they had a direct line of communication with local health departments, what things would they want us to know, what kind of concerns they had, and that sort of thing. So the information that I gathered from the Facebook group really closely aligned with the conversations I had with the stakeholders. And this is a chart of the different topic areas that I came up with that were of the greatest concern. So one of the greatest concerns was that cottage food vendors are already selling at locations that are not allowed under the law. So that was the greatest concern, was that they did not really understand that they could only sell at farmers markets or from their home with very specific restrictions. Some vendors are also using ingredients from unapproved sources. There was a lot of confusion over the cottage food law versus the cupcake law. There's quite a few producers that are making cottage foods in a location other than their home kitchen. So they're actually producing in another licensed establishment or a community kitchen, and they would actually no longer be considered cottage food. There's quite a bit of confusion over what foods can be sold, and people are selling foods that are not allowed under cottage food. There's questions on labeling. They don't quite understand what type of registration or licensing is needed. I think there were some people who thought that they needed a manufacturer food license in order to produce under cottage food. There's a lot of questions about how to start a business or the taxes they have to pay, the insurance they need, and that sort of thing. And there's also confusion on what type of food safety training is required. And I think this is something we see with our restaurants as well, that oftentimes they don't really understand the difference between a food handler certificate and a certified food manager certificate. And a lot of these people were getting advice from other cottage food vendors, and it oftentimes was not correct advice. So in addition to those conversations and that data that I gathered, there are quite a few drawbacks of the current certified food manager training and requiring it for cottage food vendors in particular. This training was designed for restaurants, people in charge of restaurants, the managers or owners, or of other commercial kitchens. Commercial kitchens are designed very differently from home kitchens. I know in my home kitchen, I definitely do not have a 3-compartment sink. I don't have a hand washing sink, that sort of thing. The refrigeration capabilities are a little bit different. You know, I have a standard refrigerator I bought from Lowe's. I make sure it's at least 38 degrees in there. I keep a thermometer in there. But, you know, it's not the massive walk-in coolers or even the commercial style coolers that are being used in restaurants. And so the Certified Food Manager course was really designed for use with that sort of equipment and not your typical home kitchen equipment. Cottage food producers are also limited in the foods they can produce. So the Certified Food Manager course actually results in hours of them studying and memorizing food safety information and concepts that they will never use. An example of that would be the cooking temperatures of meat. Cottage food producers also prepare foods that are unique to their industry, which are not covered in Certified Food Manager courses, like canning, fermentation, and acidification. And oftentimes, even local health departments have, don't have the education level necessary to fully assess whether somebody is canning or fermenting or acidifying, because this is something we very rarely see. It's considered a special process. And most of the time, this is not occurring at the restaurants that we normally inspect. IEHA also supports the use of a non-certified food manager course for cottage food producers in particular. And currently there is no food safety course available that combines the concepts of the Certified Food Manager course and the food code into easily used food safety information for a home kitchen. So combining this information, I came up with a problem statement for this project. And that was that many operators of home kitchens in Illinois appear unaware of food safety laws, including the cottage food laws, and may find the required Certified Food Protection Manager food safety training designed for restaurants and other retail food establishments to be overly complicated, given the differences between a commercial kitchen and a home kitchen. So I had several program aims for my training program, and that was to develop, deliver, and evaluate an educational training program designed for entrepreneurs operating out of a home kitchen. And I wanted to focus specifically on understanding, increasing the understanding of the current and proposed Illinois cottage food law, and adapting food safety concepts that would be learned in a required Certified Food Manager course to a home kitchen. I then created a logic model that helps, it's really a roadmap of what I wanted to do with the training and what sort of activities I would need to complete, what the physical final project would look like, and what sort of outcomes I wanted to achieve and evaluate. This training curriculum, it ended up consisting of two parts. The first part was about the current and proposed cottage food law, and the second part was food safety tips for a home kitchen. I created these, I made PowerPoint presentations, and I narrated them and recorded them, and then converted them to videos. I then uploaded the videos to YouTube, and I created a training website to house the videos, the evaluation tools I used, and also a resource page where cottage food vendors could access the law directly, water well testing information, the Garden Gates to Dinner Plates website through the University of Illinois Extension Office, and had a variety of resources that they may find useful. The website was compatible with both computers and mobile devices, so people could complete this training on their cell phones. And the videos could be paused and restarted at a later time, which gave the participants the freedom to watch the videos at their own pace. The first part was the current and proposed cottage food laws, and this video ended up being 45 minutes long. And the topics that it included were where cottage food products could be produced, what foods were allowed to be produced in our cottage food, where the products could be sold, the labeling and placarding, the training requirements associated with it, and also there was a section on the proposed changes to the law, and those proposed changes were the ones that were in place as of January. I believe they have actually changed several times since then. Part 2 was food safety tips for a home kitchen. This video was an hour and 7 minutes long, and it covered ways to adapt the knowledge from the food code and the certified food manager course to practical applications in a home kitchen. It only covered food safety topics that were relevant to cottage food. So it did not include things like, the temperature of how to cook chicken. The topics included were using foods from unapproved sources, making sure that source was safe, and that included private well testing, which is something that will probably be added to the new amendment. It covered thermometer use, cold holding, time as a control, hand washing, bare hand contact and illness, produce cleaning, sanitizers and cross-contamination, and having pets and children in the kitchen. For this part of the training, I also used, I don't know if you're familiar, but the AFDO actually has a manual for cottage foods that I found very helpful as well when I created this. I also created the training website to house all this information. So this is a screenshot of what the training website looked like. It is still active, so if you really wanted to go to it, I could provide you a link to it. So the targeted population for the training, I really wanted to target current or future cottage food producers in Illinois. I wanted to have at least 5 to 25 participants in the training. The training was free, and the participants were not provided any compensation for completing the training, and the identities of the participants was kept confidential. This is the advertisement that I used to find participants for the training. I posted it to Facebook, specifically our Peoria City County Health Department Environmental Health page, which I would highly recommend you go and like us. We put a lot of great information out there. I also advertised it on a Peoria community group, a Peoria East Bluff group, and the Illinois Cottage Food Entrepreneurs Facebook group. The post was shared 10 times. It reached at least 1,700 people, and the training link was clicked on at least 121 times. To evaluate the success of the program, I decided to use the Kirkpatrick Training Evaluation Model. This evaluation model has 4 different levels. The first level is measuring the participants' reaction to the training, how they felt about it, how they felt about their learning experience, how satisfied they were with the materials. Level 2 is assessing their learning or their knowledge. So this would be the increase in knowledge before and after. So This is mostly completed with a pre and post test that you may be familiar with. Level 3 assesses their behavior. So did the training modify their behavior in any way? And level 4 was results. So this would be, are we seeing results of this training as a health department? Are we seeing more people becoming cottage food vendors and becoming a legitimate business? That sort of thing. I created several evaluation tools to monitor the success of the program. I did complete a pre and post test. I also made a training evaluation tool, and I made a kitchen self-inspection or a kitchen self-assessment tool as well. The pre-test was completed before the training, and it consisted of demographic information. There was a knowledge check. There was also questions about the behavior of the producer in their own kitchen. So that was the kitchen self-inspection tool. And I also created a consent form because I did this through my university. I had to go through an internal review board process where I did have to get consent from the participants, and they knew they were participating in a study. The post-test was completed immediately following the training. And this was just a knowledge check. There were 10 total questions. It was the same 10 questions that was on the pretest. 5 of them were on the cottage food law, but only on the current law. I did not add any questions about the proposed changes. And I also had 5 questions on food safety in the home. The training evaluation was also completed immediately after the training. And this was completely anonymous. So the pre-test and the post-test, in order to match the results, I asked for participants' first name and email address, but this evaluation was anonymous. The participants rated different statements. There were 8 statements about the training using a 5-point scale from strongly disagree to strongly agree. I asked them also what food safety measures they plan on implementing in their home kitchen as a result of the training. And I also provided space for them to make comments on how the training could be improved. The last evaluation tool was the kitchen self-inspection tool. This was a survey that was sent to participants 1 to 2 weeks after the training. There were 15 behavior-based questions about their home kitchen, and these questions were also asked on the pre-test. They would respond to these questions with always, sometimes, or never. The inspection tool was scored. If they answered always, they scored 2 points, sometimes was 1 point, and never was 0 points, for a total of 30 possible points. Those point values were then corresponded to a rating of poor, needs improvement, good, excellent, or perfect, and offered tips for improvement of food safety in the participant's home kitchen. The desired outcomes for this training, short term, which evaluated the Kirkpatrick level 2 of learning, was I wanted to see an increase of knowledge of cottage food law and home food safety. And I measured that by, I wanted the participants to score at least 80% on the post-test. My midterm outcomes, I wanted to see producers implement the food safety skills that they learned in the training to their home kitchens. So I wanted them to rate themselves as good, excellent, or perfect on the kitchen self-inspection form. Long term, I was hoping to see a reduction in the level of non-licensed food complaints that the Peoria City County Health Department receives. And I want that to be less than 10% of all complaints that we are receiving. Also, long term, I wanted to implement continuous improvement of the training program. And to measure this, I would put into place the comments that they made about improvements on the training evaluation. And I also wanted them to mark neutral, agree, or strongly agree with the statements on the training evaluation. Anything marked strongly disagree or disagree would be something that I would look at in continuous improvement of the program. So what were the results of the training? I did training and data collection over the course of 10 days in March. The cottage food law training video was viewed 11 times, and the food safety in home kitchen video was viewed 9 times. There was a total of 9 participants in the training. 7 of these participants completed the demographics portion of the pretest. However, only 6 of them completed the knowledge check and the kitchen self-assessment portion of the pretest. 3 people completed the post-test and training evaluation, and interestingly enough, these were actually 3 different people who did not complete the pretest. So out of the 6 who completed the pretest, none of them completed the training and the post-test. And of the 3 who completed the training and the post-test and training evaluation, none of them completed the pretest. And only one of those 3 completed the entire training by completing the follow-up kitchen self-assessment that was sent to them about a week and a half after they completed the actual training. So I do not have numbers on how, like, what stage the people who did the pretest dropped out of the training. I don't know whether they started the videos and didn't continue the videos, or whether they never even viewed the videos. So demographically, my participants were from 4 different counties. 2 of them were from Cook County, 2 of them were from McHenry County, 2 of them were from Peoria County, and 1 of them was from Champaign County. About 71% of the people who completed the training had prior formal or informal food safety training. Only 28.6% of them didn't have any previous food safety training. As far as their status of becoming a cottage food vendor, 14% were already registered as cottage food. 28.6% were just interested in learning more about cottage food, and 28.6% of them were possible future cottage food producers. They were just kind of looking into what was required. Interestingly enough, 28.6% of these people were already selling from home, but were not licensed or registered in their county. So the pretest results, the knowledge portion of the pretest, the total score, the average was 6.6 out of 10, which was a total percentage of about 67%, which was about what I expected. And hopefully we would increase that to 80% to see that desired outcome. Also, they did average at 22.7 as their home kitchen self-assessment score, which actually equated to a good rating of their kitchen. So some things I did not expect to see on the pretest. I was actually expecting the food safety scores to be significantly lower than what they were. So if you notice on the pretest, specifically the knowledge check portion, there were 10 questions, 5 on the cottage food and 5 on food safety. And you can see that the participants did quite well on the actual food safety portion of the pretest. And that would be indicated to me that maybe the food safety component was not actually needed for the training. They also scored quite well on the behaviors in the home kitchen. It was really, when we look at the scores for the actual law itself and understanding the requirements of a cottage food vendor, that they didn't do so well. So the average there was 1.8 out of 5. The post-test, so these would be the 3 people who actually completed the training. They did quite well. So our average total score on the knowledge check was 9.3 out of 10. And you can see that that cottage food law score came up quite a bit to 4.3 out of 5. So that total percentage was a little over 93%. The one person who completed the home kitchen self-assessment after the training scored 27 out of 30 on their self-assessment. So this is a comparison of the pre and post test. So you can see we had a nice bump in knowledge for the cottage food law itself. And we also had the overall percent correct of the knowledge portion went up quite a bit. The home kitchen self-assessment also went up quite a bit. The training evaluation, this is that anonymous training tool. All of the participants did agree or strongly agree with all the statements. So they were satisfied with the training material. They thought it was relevant. They said they learned from the course. It was easy to navigate and complete. They were committed to implementing some of the food safety tips, and they were also confident that they could implement those in their home kitchens. And they felt that their knowledge of the cottage food law and the knowledge of food safety in their home kitchens also increased. The 3 participants who completed it, I asked them, what safety measures do you plan on implementing in your home kitchen? So these are the 3 responses they gave. One was giving items more space in their refrigerator to either properly cool or to allow air circulation to maintain 41 degrees or less. One said they were going to start cleaning their kitchen sink prior to preparation of foods. And the third told me that they were going to start looking for the EPA registration on the bleach that they purchased for sanitizing. There was only one suggested improvement, and that was to break the training into segments and have review questions after each section. And I completely agree with this. The training videos were quite long at 45 minutes and an hour and 7 minutes. So it took people about 2 hours to complete the training altogether. So when I look at the results of the evaluation tools to the outcomes that I wanted, the program was successful. The short term, the score, I wanted a score of at least 80% on the post test, and the average score was 93.3%. I wanted the participants to rate themselves as good, excellent, or perfect on the kitchen self-inspection form, and the average score was 27, which corresponded to excellent. I also wanted to see a reduction in the level of non-licensed food complaints that Peoria County receives. I don't think this was successful. It's a long-term outcome, so it's something that I could not measure right now. I'd have to wait at least a year to measure that. However, I feel like this outcome is unlikely because there were only 2 participants from Peoria County, and we know that there's quite a bit more unlicensed food vendors out there than just 2. Also, participants agreed or strongly agreed with all the statements on the training evaluation, and they gave feedback for continuous improvement of the program. So there were some limitations on my outcome. So I did have a very small sample size, with 6 completing the pretest, 3 completing the post-test and training evaluation, and 1 completing the kitchen self-inspection. So I don't think the sample was very representative of all the cottage food vendors out there. Also, it's people who wanted to voluntarily take my training. And I would assume that people who maybe aren't doing great with their food safety and their cottage food, or that are maybe operating illegally, aren't the kind that seek out training voluntarily. Also, participants who completed the post-test did not complete the pre-test. So while I can compare some of these averages, I cannot make direct comparisons because the people who completed the post-test may have had excellent knowledge of cottage food and food safety prior to completing the training. I just don't know because they didn't tell me in the pre-test. Also, 71.4% of the participants had previous food safety training, which could have led to the higher scores to begin with in the pretest portion of the food safety knowledge. And the wording of the questions and answers on the knowledge check might have given away what the correct food safety answers were. So those are some limitations on the outcomes that I found. So in conclusion, I do think that the training was successful because it achieved the evaluation metrics that I set in place. However, this is obviously limited from the data that I have from this training, and that there were other things that could have influenced the results, such as not being able to directly compare the pre and post tests for each participant. I have not really looked at the long-term outcomes yet, but again, I think that this is unlikely that the training would have an impact on the reduction in unlicensed food operations, unless we also combine this with future training cycles and an element of enforcement. So if we find people who are operating illegally and we say, yes, you have to take this training, you know, I could see where our numbers may come down at that point, but I do think that this outcome is unlikely. If this training continues in the future, I think that future training cycles should target those with no previous food safety training, so better data could be collected. And I do think that Illinois should consider replacing the certified food manager requirements for cottage food producers with a food safety training specific for the cottage food industry, because they do have different processes, equipment, and food items that they can produce under the law that are very different than those that most people with the certified food manager certificate would be dealing with in their restaurants. So future program improvements, I think the training could be improved with shorter training videos. Overall, I would aim for about 6 minutes in length, and I would also do them on individual topic areas. This would allow greater flexibility of vendors to only complete the topic areas that apply to them. So, you know, even with the cottage food industry and how they're different than the foods that restaurants are producing, you know, some cottage food vendors, they only do baked goods. And so maybe they really only need to have training videos about, you know, personal hygiene, or using time only as a control for softening butter or bringing eggs to room temperature. And they wouldn't necessarily need other portions of the training about like canning or acidification and that sort of thing, because they're not producing those food items. And it was recommended that there be review questions following each training. And I do think that would be helpful, that at the end of the 6-minute training video on that topic, you know, maybe just very quick knowledge check questions could be added to make sure that the participants understood the, you know, the real big points, I guess, of that training. In future trainings, I would also add in food safety information specific to canning and acidification of foods, and also fermentation. I personally have never done any of these things in my own home kitchen, so I am not super familiar with all the details that go into canning, acidification, and fermentation. However, I have taken a special processing course, and I'm confident that I could at least work through the food safety issues. And these topic areas are not included in a normal certified food manager course. So the cottage food vendors who are doing these things are not getting that food safety information anywhere. And this is particularly risky. Botulism is what is associated, you know, with improper canning, acidification, and fermentation of foods. And we know that, you know, it may not be getting a call saying, hey, I have a foodborne illness complaint and I had some vomiting and diarrhea. We're going to get a call from a hospital saying somebody died of botulism. So this is particularly risky, and I do think there should be specific food safety information regarding that topic added to food safety training of cottage food vendors. future improvements to the evaluation process. There were obviously some issues with people being able to complete the training without doing the pre-test. So I would add a feature that locks out people from the training until that pre-test is completed. Unfortunately for my school's internal review board approval, any of the questions they could choose not to answer. So I could not actually make any of the questions required, which is how the vendors got around completing the pre-test and going straight to the training. I would also change some of the wording of the questions and the answers in the knowledge check portion of the pre and post test to make it not so obvious maybe what the correct answer was for the food safety component. And also I would issue a certificate of completion when the kitchen self-assessment is complete at the end. And hopefully this would give more of an incentive for people to actually completely complete the training program. So only one person followed it through to the end. And I kind of feel the other two were maybe like, I'm done with this training. I don't want to participate anymore. So I'm not going to do this kitchen self-assessment. But hopefully if a certificate of completion was offered, that would be more of an incentive to complete it. I would also increase the time frame for completing the training and evaluation for data collection. In this case, I was very limited on time, so I could complete this training program and the paper associated with it during the semester that I was, the spring semester that I was doing this program. So I would expand it to allow more people to also complete the training and to collect that data. And I would target the individuals with no previous food safety training. During the course of the research for this training program and with talking to the stakeholders and the cottage food vendors, I do have further recommendations that this training program would benefit by making it more of an all-encompassing training program that embraces both public health and economic development. It seemed like the vendors really could have also used training information on how to start a business, how to register their business, the types of business ownership, how to pay taxes, if they had the correct zoning from their house, you know, the types of insurance that they would need, and then also how to scale up their businesses. So I really think we need to be working with these cottage food vendors and saying, okay, what are your future plans? Are your future plans to open a bakery? Are your future plans to just stay in your house? Some of the demographic information I didn't include in the presentation showed that 50% of the people who did my training do want to scale up their business and 50% are okay working out of their homes. So I would like to see more pathways for people to actually come under licensure with the health department and, you know, scale up their business. I also think that local health departments would benefit from a cottage food training program to learn and understand what is allowed, what is not allowed, and how to evaluate cottage food menus. One of the recurring themes that I came across was there are horror stories, and I mean these are truly horror stories, of cottage food vendors in Illinois and the animosity they have towards their local health department. And I think the feeling is probably mutual. You know, there was one vendor who said she had to spend $5,000 in lab testing of some of her products because her health department wouldn't let her just get a simple pH test to prove that her product was non-TCS. She had to go, you know, way above and beyond with some of her testing. There were horror stories about health departments saying that they weren't even going to allow cottage food because their county had not adopted an ordinance to allow cottage food, which is not allowed. Cottage food is a state law. There is the cupcake law, which is a little bit different, that your county cannot allow, but you do have to allow cottage food. So I really do think that there could be a training program specifically designed for local health departments to really understand what is allowed and what is not allowed. Also, the menu review for cottage food, I had multiple cottage food vendors reach out to me and they said, hey, you seem so much nicer than my local health department. Can you look at my menu and tell me if there's any red flags you see? And some of these menus were quite elaborate. I had to Google things that I had no clue what they even were. There was a lady who wanted to make like borage pesto. I had no idea what borage was, so I had to Google that. So, um, really understanding that, these are some odd foods that some of these vendors are making. It is quite a bit more than just cookies and cupcakes that they're making in their house. So, also, we need to learn how to evaluate those menus better. And then also, we need to increase our own knowledge of canning, acidification, and fermentation as well. I'd also like to see local health departments and cottage food producers build a better relationship of trust and mutual understanding to better serve and protect the public. I think with cottage food, it's often looked at as, the health departments are an adversary. And I think that's somewhat built into the cottage food law of, you have these people who don't want to be inspected and licensed, and we obviously inspect and license people. So I kind of think the law builds in this adversary role between the two. But I would really like to see cottage food producers reaching out to the local health departments with questions that they have, and us responding in a way that they feel comfortable reaching out to us in the future with questions, because we really are the subject matter experts when it comes to food safety. And these cottage food producers are getting really bad advice from other producers because those are the people they're comfortable with talking to, and they're maybe not comfortable reaching out to the local health department. So overall, I do think that we need to work on building a better relationship with these vendors. All right, if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat and I'll take a look at them. If you want to reach out to me about this or the previous presentation, this is my phone number and my email address, and I would be happy to respond to any questions that you may have.
There was one question in the chat, but I think you may have answered it already, about what type of time as a public health control you would be using in a home kitchen.
So that specifically would be for, I don't know, I bake a lot. I enjoy baking. And oftentimes with recipes, you do have to leave your butter sit out at room temperature to soften, or you have to have room temperature eggs for baking. And so you would use time only as a control when you remove those items from the refrigerator because they are a TCS food. And you would use time only as control when you leave them out to soften or bring up to room temperature. And then you would have to use them within 4 hours in your baked goods. And then it's also educating as well about, if I have a dozen eggs in my refrigerator and I need one egg for whatever I'm making, knowing that I should not be taking the dozen eggs out of the refrigerator to come up to room temperature. I should only be removing the one egg that I need to protect the rest of the eggs or the rest of the sticks of butter. Okay, I'm just looking through the questions real quick. Yes, charcuterie boards are the new home kitchen tamales, especially in Peoria County. We're seeing a lot of that, although they would not fall under cottage food. All right. I can send you the link to the cottage food training website as well. Home inspection. Woo, another MSU student graduating this semester. Great job. I love meeting other people in my program area. And Carrie added the link, and I can put in a link as well to the program. Let me see if I can find it real quick. All right. Well, if you'd like the link to the training program, please email me and I will send you the link to the website. All right. Thank y'all.
Thank you very much, Corrine. I do appreciate you coming and speaking to us. That is it for today. I will see everyone back here on Thursday at 1 p.m. Have a good night, everybody.